All right, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here with us to our APT AT webinar. This is our monthly series that we are doing. If you are just joining us, please feel free to get onto those slides. It is a bit.ly link, so it will be bit.ly/APT AT July 23. So that'll be a capital A, capital P, capital T, capital A, capital T. July will have a capital J and then the number 23. We've got it in the chat, so as we get going, Ashley will probably post it in the chat for us as we get going. So welcome, everyone. We're very excited today. We have a special guest presenter with us today as well, but we're here to talk about accessible travel. And so with that, we're just going to go ahead and move to our next slide. There we go. So welcome from the Alabama AT Act program. So APT AT, that is us. That's our name for our Assistive Technology Act program. And our job is really to increase knowledge, access, and acquisition of assistive technology throughout the state of Alabama. We do that through several different programs. That includes short-term device loans. So if there's a piece of technology you think might be beneficial to you or to a loved one, but you don't have a way to try it out before you buy it and spend hundreds of dollars, we are a resource for you to do that. So we might have something, either that exact one that you want, maybe something similar. We also have demonstrations available of other types of assistive technology as well. We have our reutilization program, so people can donate assistive tech that they no longer use or durable medical equipment that they no longer use. And other people who need it can pick it up from one of our 5 reuse centers. We provide all kinds of trainings. So we do these monthly as just a way to bring awareness to assistive technology, but we're also happy to cater to specific needs for different organizations and such. We also provide technical assistance. So if you are an organization that wants to revamp or look at how you're doing AT implementation, please reach out to us. And then also we are a resource for financial assistance. So please, we'll have some links and everything for you to be able to further explore our program. So welcome to our webinar. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As we go through the session, if you have questions, please don't be shy. Drop them in the chat. We'll try to make sure that we touch on them throughout the session. And if not, we'll always make sure that we look at the very, very end to make sure that we've answered everyone's questions. If you prefer not to type and you would just like to jump on a microphone, we just ask that participants wait until the end of the session to do that, just so that way it keeps our flow going. And this session will be recorded. So I know some of you are on your lunch break, or maybe you're just kind of catching in and just want to make sure you get access to links and things. This will be recorded and it is available through our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ and then that @ and then it'll be APT AT. And we'll make sure that you have that link as well when you get to the slides. A little bit of a change today. So previously we were doing captions through a captioning service where you would click on a link that we would give you. And today we have a little bit of a different one that we're going to try out. So the first option, of course, is through Zoom. So if you're familiar with your Zoom toolbar, you should see down at the bottom, or wherever your Zoom toolbar is placed, excuse me, you should see an option to click where it says captions. If you're not seeing that captions button, if you go to where you see the more with the 3 dots, you should see the captions there where you can then pull up captions to be viewable. We also have a new app that we were introduced to, and we thought we'd try it out. It is something that you would have to download. It's called One Fusion app, and it is a caption overlay. So it is similar to where you could see it in your Zoom screen, but instead of it being locked to Zoom's caption settings, this one you could put wherever you want on the screen. You can adjust fonts and sizes. So if you have a copy of the link to our slides. You should have, you'll be able to access those downloadable links from there. And just if you are using that Fusion app, I think we all sent you an email right beforehand. So if you wanted to download it in advance, you just need to use that session number. And I'll put that in the chat right now. But if you don't want to use Fusion app, that's okay. We wanted to make sure we had the Zoom captions available as well. Okay. So our agenda for today, we're just going to do some quick introductions. I've already done my introduction part, but I want to make sure we give some time for our guest presenter today. We're going to go over just a brief example or definition of accessible travel. And then we're going to have an interview with our guest, Hank Poore, and then do a review of those tips and resources we talked about. And then, of course, have time at the end for questions. All right, so before we can get started with that, though, we do ask for you to participate in our attendance poll. This is a federally funded program. We are one of many state ACT programs. So we are for the state of Alabama. Everybody else has got their own, but we're federally funded, and they like for us to submit data to make sure we're doing our jobs and people are attending. So if you could please do us a huge favor and complete the short poll that Ashley's going to activate for us. It's going to be 2 questions. The first one's going to ask you what type of attendee you are, if you're an individual with disability, if you're a caregiver, if you work in the field. And then the second question is going to ask which state and county you live in, specifically if you live in a metro county, and that question will list all those metro counties out for you. So we'll get that going here. Thank you very much for that. So without further ado, I'm going to let him do his own introduction, but just a heads up, this is Hank Poore who's speaking with us today. I just have this lovely picture I have to share. He's in our office over here in the Homewood office. He's seated in his power wheelchair. You can see his communication device that says, "Hi, y'all." He has his phone. Also, and then also in the bottom right corner, you can see his dog, Ion. So Hank, take it away. Let us know who you are.
Hello, I'm Hank Poore, and I'm a 22-year-old with cerebral palsy. I've been fortunate enough to have some amazing travel experiences and wanted to give you a few tips.
All right, thank you. And of course, he's not going to toot his horn as well as I thought he was. So I'm gonna lay some accolades on Hank here. So Hank not only has 2 jobs that he does for his hometown in Tuscaloosa, but he is also an AT technology program assistant for us, as well as United Ability. He's advocacy chair for the Junior Board of Easter Seals of West Alabama, and also the Hank Poore Foundation, which helps people with disabilities in his community. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Hank Poore Foundation at the end. So thank you, Hank, for being here. Next, we want to talk about what we're actually here to talk about today. When we say accessible travel, right, it's just like when we talk about accessibility, what are we really talking about? And I found this definition from a website, and I thought it was pretty good. I don't know if it was all encompassing, but it was a good starting point, I feel like, and one of those where it was an easy leeway into what we're talking about. So in their article about accessible tourism, they were talking about accessibility from these 3 different dimensions, and how to consider accessibility when you're talking about accessible tourism. So their 3 dimensions they're talking about is physical access. So they're talking about thinking about people with physical disabilities that require wheelchairs or walking aids or handrails. You know, how are they able to access either ways to travel, you know, their modes of transportation, or what their destinations or their experiences. So that's something else that we don't think about when we're thinking accessible travel, not just how to get there, but once I get there, is my destination accessible? Next is sensory access for those who have sight or hearing impairments. So that idea of if I'm going somewhere as I'm traveling, how am I going to know where I need to be if I'm not going to hear announcements, or if I can't see the the flight status board, right? So how are those things going to impact my travel? But then also, again, thinking of those destinations and locales, how am I going to be able to interact? And then the third dimension they mention is communication access. So thinking about those who have impairments involving speech, vision, and hearing. So again, how are they able to communicate information back and forth to receive that information, et cetera. So I really liked the article. I did make sure to link it in the slide. So please feel free to dive a little deeper into it. Even if you just Google or go to Wikipedia and do accessible tourism. It really kind of gives you some good rabbit holes and some things to think about as you're discussing accessible travel. Okay, so we're going to show our video of our interview, and we did this for a couple of reasons. One is Hank just got back from Resna, so we wanted to make sure, should something happen where he had to get delayed or something like that, we wanted to make sure we had it pre-recorded just in case. But we also wanted to record it just in case we had any kind of tech issues, because we really felt this was important information to have. It is slightly edited, just for some timing and sound issues. So it's not really heavy. Anything that's edited out is more of just timing for between a couple of questions that I was asking Hank and for him to respond. But that's about it in terms of editing. So I just wanted to give you a heads up if it looks like my face glitched or something like that. That's what happened there. So, and I'm really excited about this. This was a great opportunity to really have Hank share his insights and his story in terms of how he's impacted when he travels by how things are designed for people with disabilities or lack thereof. So, all right. All right. So Hank, you're going to be talking with us a little bit today and sharing your own personal experiences and some of your resources in helping people with disabilities and travel. So first, can you just share a little bit about your personal experience of traveling with a disability and how it has shaped your perspective on accessible travel?
I've traveled a lot, but mostly in the US. I have traveled to the Caribbean twice, but it really doesn't require anything different for me. For me, it's fairly straightforward. If I have to travel by airplane, I take a wheelchair called the Light Rider, which is a portable power wheelchair that collapses to fit in the cargo area of an airplane. The joystick and battery comes out easily, and I always bring them in the cabin of the plane to avoid any damage. As far as my perception, I think we have a long way to go to make sure all individuals can travel easily. It would definitely start with changes made with air travel, which I hope are on the horizon. Also, we travel to the beach fairly often, and it is extremely difficult to find access to the beaches. While things have gotten better, such as widespread beach wheelchair rentals, it remains difficult to find properties and access points that have ramps to the beach. While some of the public beach access points have ramps, many of them don't. And even if they do, I can't travel by car to access points simple, because the beach wheelchair will not fit in a vehicle. It would be awesome if people with disabilities could travel without so much hassle. That being said, I still love to travel, and it is totally worth the inconveniences.
There we go. Thank you. That's really interesting to hear. Now you mentioned, and you can just answer yes or no. I just want to clarify and make sure I heard some of the equipment that you're using correctly. For airplane use, typically you use a power wheelchair, but you're saying when you go on an airplane, you're using something called a light rider, and that's a modified power chair, it sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. And then also you mentioned for beaches that you were having to rent what is called a beach wheelchair.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And I have a feeling as we talk a little bit, we'll probably go into some more about those types of resources. But my next question for you is, what are some of the common challenges that an individual with disabilities face when traveling? And you've mentioned some of them, but I know you have a few more. So why don't you let us know about those?
There are many challenges for individuals with disabilities. For me and my family, the biggest challenges are finding wheelchair accessible accommodations. There are just not many available at all. If flying, there is always a concern that our wheelchairs will get damaged, which is a fairly common occurrence, unfortunately. It can also be difficult to find wheelchair vehicles to rent when you reach your destination. And traveling overseas can be extra complicated as other countries don't have anything like the ADA and therefore have very poor accessibility.
Well, thank you for those considerations. You mentioned the wheelchair access accommodations, being able to just get access into a building. And of course, there's so many news reports of all those power chairs getting damaged while people are flying and doing air travel. And again, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You were talking about wheelchair vehicles. So this is when I'm at a destination and I would need to rent a car or a van that could accommodate one of my travelers that uses a wheelchair, correct?
Yes,
Right. Um, so my next question is, um, in your opinion, so as people are planning their travel, and if they're a person with a disability, what are the most important factors for them to consider when planning that trip as a person with a disability?
I think the most critical thing is to plan carefully and make sure you are prepared. It is good to confirm that a rental, even if it says it is accessible, is truly accessible. Many people don't understand that a single step entering the rental can make the rental impossible for a wheelchair user to access. If there are any doubts, contact the owner or agency to confirm.
And when you're talking about rental, I'm assuming like, people are doing like an Airbnb or, getting like a cabin somewhere and they say, oh, it's fully accessible. And you're right, you've got that one step into the door and all of a sudden you've got a big hassle trying to figure out how you're going to get into that, that housing for your trip.
Yes, most people say that their houses are accessible, but they are actually not accessible.
And a lot of times too, I would assume, and we don't have to go into it fully, but like you said, you really do need to make those phone calls and reach out to those people that are renting those places because they may not fully understand what it means to be accessible, what those actual requirements are to, it's like you said, confirming, asking very clarifying questions, I think is very important. So this kind of leads into my next question. So do you have some tips or advice for individuals with disabilities who are planning to travel for the first time? I know, especially for some people, as COVID restrictions are going away and people are eager to get out and go somewhere, but maybe this is their first time having to really plan that trip as a person with a disability. What are some tips and advice?
We try to avoid flying if at all possible. I've found that driving is way less stressful, more safe, and a guarantee that your equipment arrives with you undamaged. If you have to fly, avoid having connections where you are forced to exit the plane. If non-stop flights are unavailable, I recommend giving yourself at least a 2-hour layover in case of delays, and to give adequate time to retrieve your wheelchair from the cargo area of the plane. As far as rentals, such as Vrbo and Airbnb, My family has purchased portable ramps that allow us to access properties that might have a few stairs to enter. It opens up a lot more options for us. And lastly, when I travel, I try to anticipate any challenges or problems that might come up. When problems do arise, be prepared to be polite and kind to the airline staff. You will ultimately get satisfactory help if you remain calm and respectful.
I think that's just good advice for anybody, to be honest, to just be calm and respectful to all the airline staff. You did bring up some really interesting things, and I just kind of want to reiterate them because I think they're things that I wouldn't have thought about if I were having to make those travel arrangements for somebody with a disability. You mentioned if you are going to be flying, to really, if you can, do those nonstop flights. That way it's just a one and done. But if you're having to do connections, you really need to have some time to make that next flight. You mentioned a 2-hour layover, and I didn't even think about it, but you said, you're going to need to get access to your chair from the cargo hold, right? So like where everybody else just goes to the next plane, you've got to wait around for that chair to show up so you can actually get to your next flight. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And something else, and I didn't think about this one, but this was a great thing that you mentioned, just having the ability to have a portable ramp with you. So if you're driving to a site that happens to have that step that nobody told you about, being able to use that ramp to get where you need to go. So I know that's something we'll definitely make sure we have in our resources for everybody later on. So thanks for bringing those up. So now that we've talked about how to get somewhere, now my next question for you is, are there specific destinations or types of travel experiences that you would recommend for people with disabilities?
Most ski resorts offer adaptive snow skiing, which is a great thing to do with friends and family. We have been a few times as a family, and it is really fun. I've also found that larger cities have much better transportation options than mid-size or smaller cities. For example, Chicago has an entire app which is similar to Uber that provides wheelchair taxis. It makes getting around so much easier.
I would not have thought of ski resorts. That's really cool, actually. My husband used to go skiing when he was a kid, so now I have a reason for research purposes. I'll tell him that he needs to take me to go skiing now. So, and I really like that you mentioned looking into those specific city resources. I know you mentioned Chicago has a place where you can kind of do Uber taxis or taxi type services, but specifically designed for people with disabilities. I know I've run into the same thing in Austin as well. So, just getting your Google search skills in place and really digging into your destination and seeing if they have those types of things available. That's great advice. So can you share any personal anecdotes or stories about a memorable experience you've had while traveling with a disability?
The one that pops into my mind first involves a trip to the Florida coast last Christmas. My mom thought she had checked all the boxes. The house had a main floor bedroom and had super easy beach access. We had rented a beach chair that would be there when we arrived, and we had studied the photos to be certain of the stairs for entry. We knew there would be a few steps to the front door, so we brought our portable ramp so I could get access. But in spite of all our pre-planning, we had missed a single stair at a right angle at the house entry. Because of the angle of the stair, our ramp was useless. We didn't panic, but started considering if we had any other options. We opened the garage and found an entry there, but it had 5 stairs, way too many for the ramp, or so we thought. Seeing there were no other options, my sister and mom placed the ramp over the 5 stairs. I'm not kidding you when I tell you the ramp was at a 45-degree angle. My mom and sister got behind my wheelchair, and on the count of 3, I hit the joystick and they started pushing. Fortunately, I made it to the top without injury, but I wouldn't recommend. Coming down was even more scary, as I'm sure you can imagine. Fortunately, my brother arrived the next day and provided some much needed muscle to the situation. It all worked out, and as a matter of fact, we are renting the same place this upcoming Christmas. The only difference is that we will bring a longer ramp, and be prepared. Another story that I remember well happened during a trip to Exuma, in the Bahamas. Being our first trip there, we were not familiar with the lay of the land, so to speak. We always try to pack as lightly as possible, but at the last minute, my mom threw in this cheap chariot-looking contraption that has big wheels and can move through sand. Let me tell you, it was a good thing she did. We did a full day boat tour, and we folded the chair and put it on the boat. As it turns out, I would have had to stay on the boat and not get to experience anything fun. Because of this chair, I was able to get out and pet the iguanas, hang out with swimming pigs, enjoy a beautiful sandbar, and actually get to lunch. Without it, I would have had to just be a spectator and would not have been able to get to the restaurant and eat.
Oh, wow. Um, those are some very extreme stories. And I love that you really did mention about the ramp, and I think that's something some of us who don't use a wheelchair or aren't familiar with, having wheelchair users in our life, um, how important that angle can be, especially for the user's safety. So when we talk about a 45-degree angle, right? So like 90 degrees is square, and then 45, that's really steep. And I was thinking to myself, I was trying to make like this terrible joke about like you're in Florida and you built your own theme park, like you just built this crazy little roller coaster in your own garage that you were renting, because that sounds absolutely frightening to me to have to figure out how to deal with a 45-degree angle. And your second story where you were talking about being on this boat, but having that chair where you're able to, essentially depart the boat and be able to do all those experiences. You're talking about iguanas and getting to pet the pigs, and not just being a spectator. And I think that's something else that people don't think about when they're looking at accessibility. They think, oh, well, they have the ability to see what's going on, or they have the ability to, somewhat access it. But if they're not really able to engage and interact, that's not really the same thing. That's just sitting there and watching somebody else. And, people watching's fun to an extent, but that's not all I want to do while I'm on vacation. So my next question for you, and it sounds like you've already got a good list running for us, but what resources and tools do you recommend for individuals with disabilities to ensure a smooth travel experience?
I would highly recommend following Curb Free with Corey Lee on Facebook or Instagram. He is a travel blogger who happens to be a power wheelchair user. He offers lots of tips and information about the accessibility of cities around the world. Another great resource is Accessible Go. They are a website that helps book accessible hotels according to your accessibility needs.
Well, those are great, and we will definitely make sure when we wrap up on the second half of this webinar to make sure that we give those resources. I know that I've been pulling up some additional review websites and accessible travel, essentially travel agents or travel sites that can set up destinations and do all the booking for you. So it's really nice to hear that you found some ones that I didn't know about. So I'm excited to take a peek at those. This is kind of a fun question because I always like to think forward thinking and look at future trends, but are there any emerging technologies or trends that you believe will have a significant impact on accessible travel in the future?
Delta Airlines recently unveiled a prototype for seating which would allow power wheelchair users to remain in their chairs during flights. This would be a huge game changer. I also think that people who can't physically drive will do more traveling once self-driving cars become available. Who knows? Maybe there will be self-driving wheelchair van in the future. I hope so.
I don't know if I want that, because that just means that means you're out on the road. I don't know if the world is ready for Hank Poore yet, but I mean, if that means everybody and then I have to deal with you, I guess I'll be okay with it. But yeah, no, I agree. I did see that same news article about Delta and the prototype for wheelchairs. And that's really interesting what you're talking about with the self-driving cars for some people. There are several modifications that people can put in cars nowadays for different types of disabilities, to accommodate for different types of disabilities. But I could definitely see there being a larger market, especially for people who use wheelchairs as well. So thank you for those thoughts. Is there anything else you would like to share, or any message you would like to convey to our audience about traveling with a disability?
My disability has never stopped my family from traveling, so I would encourage others with disabilities to get out there and go. With advanced planning and some creativity, you can find places and activities that are really fun. I would also encourage others with disabilities to research and seek out organizations that provide experiences for differently abled individuals. For example, in Aspen, Colorado, there is an organization called Aspen Challenge. They provide access to all sorts of outdoor activities, including horseback riding, snow skiing, adaptive whitewater rafting, and challenge courses. Another nonprofit that is growing is called Project Airtime, which provides adaptive paragliding. They are based in Utah, but I believe they are expanding.
Oh, that is really cool. I wasn't familiar with Aspen Challenger or Project Airtime. So again, we'll make sure all of these resources are available for people. But I think what you mentioned at the very beginning is very important for people, to really not let it deter families. I think that's something where a lot of families just kind of assume, we have a family member, they have a disability, it's going to, we're not going to be able to go anywhere, we're not going to be able to do anything. But we also do have to acknowledge it's going to take that extra planning. And for some people, it's going to take some extra resources too, that they, most of us don't have to deal with, because that's extra time, as well as some other financial costs that maybe the rest of us don't have to deal with too. So, but it's doable. It's a lot of research and a lot of legwork, so to speak. So, but I do appreciate you just kind of encouraging people to not let that stop them. So before we go, though, I want to talk to you about something that you are working on. You have, if people don't already know, the Hank Poore Foundation. And I want you to just kind of tell us, how can the Hank Poore Foundation help someone with a disability when they are traveling?
Our foundation will pay to rent beach wheelchairs if traveling to the beach. We will also provide grants for other recreational experiences, such as adaptive snow skiing. Unfortunately, these things tend to be very expensive, so we really enjoy easing the burden for families and individuals.
That's exciting. Especially, and that was a beautiful segue from our last question, because, these families want to do all these wonderful things, but it does come at an extra cost often. So having this nonprofit organization that you run, that's really dedicated to making sure families get to have these experiences with all of their family members, and not just, having to leave some people behind. So we'll definitely make sure we have your foundation information, so that way people can look into it and see if this is something that can help them as well. So
I think you covered it all. Thanks for letting me share my thoughts with you.
Apparently I was talking and nobody was listening. So hopefully you found that interview as informative and entertaining as I did. We're coming to our resource section. So please feel free, if you have questions, to go ahead and start putting them in the chat. Hank is here, I'm here. We love to talk about this stuff, as you can tell. But I just wanted to point out a couple things that we talked about in the interview. Hank mentioned the light writer. So I did put a link to a light writer. I don't know if this is Hank's specific model, so you may need to get with him later to ask more specific details on that. But as you can see, it is kind of like what I like to call a streamlined version of what we typically see in a power wheelchair. And then next we have this beach wheelchair, which has these larger wheels, so it can accommodate that different type of terrain in the sandy beaches. And then our third picture over here is just a portable ramp. And what's nice about portable ramps is you can pick these up at Walmart, you can pick them up at Lowe's, just about anywhere you can go. And unfortunately, it was one of those when I was having a conversation with my colleague, you shouldn't have to buy the portable ramp. No, you shouldn't, but it's nice to know that they're out there as a just in case. So we're going to go over a couple of tips, but like I said, please feel free to start putting some stuff in questions that you have in the chat. So most of this we went over in the interview, but I just want to clarify and reiterate some additional information. My toolbar decided to move. So just always call in advance, call the airlines, make sure that they understand exactly what kind of accommodations you need, that you understand what they're able to provide. Call your hotels and your Airbnbs. Again, making sure everybody's on the same page. Rental car companies, parks, beaches, any destinations that you're going to, any types of activities, you really want to kind of get the jump on and get that research and make sure you actually talk to a person as well. Sometimes FAQs are great, but sometimes websites don't get updated the way they need to. So you really want to make sure you actually talk to someone. Again, looking at those transportation options, like I said, there was specifically a rideshare program in Austin for people with disabilities. It wasn't Uber or Lyft. It was like an own separate company. So a lot of those are actually out there, depending on which cities you're in. Uber does have the wheelchair accessible vans, but not in every city. When you are flying, again, just make sure you have those 2 hours between connections is a good tip. And then in talking about those portable ramps, we also talked about like maybe what are some other types of AT that could be a good investment for when you're traveling. So we talked about the portable ramps, but also thinking about a foldable shower stool that you can, easily fold up, put into your suitcase, and then that way you have a shower stool with you. Suction cup grab bars. Sometimes those bathrooms that are accessible, it's just because there's like nothing and it's just a walk-in shower and everything's open. So you may still want to have some type of suction cup bar or grab bar for you to use. And then also I was looking, now they have a lot of those patient lifts, but they actually make them so they're portable and a little easier to put, not necessarily in your luggage, but at least to travel around with. So when you're making those phone calls to all these different places, what are some questions that you could be asking? Are all of the entrances accessible? Or when they say, yes, we have an accessible entrance, what is that to? Is it just to the main lobby or the main area? What other doors are there? And can I get to all of them? Or are they accessible to me? Thinking about if you're like in a hotel that has a pool, you're seeing more and more hotels that have those pool chairs that help people that aren't able to get into the pool themselves, that it can lower them into the pool. I was in my research looking at how often those chairs are not operable, or they need like 24 hours in advance to make sure that everything's, they've got all the pieces and parts and everything's running properly. So again, you might want to call them in advance and ask about that. Asking about accessible or modified equipment if they have any available. A lot of places might actually have it. It's just, they've got so many other things to talk about and give people information about. Sometimes they forget to mention, hey, we have this accessible equipment available. Just ask and we'll be able to help you out. Thinking about seating options. So not just when you're on the airplane and things like that, but like if you're going to, like I always think of the shows when you go to theme parks and, what kind of seating options are there? Where would I be able to sit if I use a wheelchair, or if I have a mobility issue? Am I stuck off to only one side? Are the chairs movable? Things like that. Asking about entrance fees or tickets for personal attendance. And there's actually in a couple of the links that we're going to share with you, they talk about when you're traveling with your personal attendant to something like a destination or vacation, making sure everybody's clear about what expenses and what the duties of the personal attendant are as well. But really do ask them about, hey, this personal attendant's coming with me to be my personal attendant. They're not here to be a part of this excursion or anything like that. Do they still have to pay for that ticket or fee? It's a good question and conversation to have with the proprietors. Asking for a full description of the itinerary or schedule can also be very useful. Just to make sure it's the experience that you want. And then that way too, you can see if there's anything you need to plan for, if you need to talk to, again, that proprietor or whoever's running the excursions. So that way, if there's any potential issues, you can look at that in advance and make sure you're going to have the enjoyable experience that you're looking for. And then lastly, ask about dietary options. It's one of those things where you don't think about it sometimes, but especially if it's going to be saying, lunch is provided or food is provided, again, getting really clarifying questions in terms of how, what, when. And again, these are just a very small sampling. This is not an exhaustive list. There may be some other questions that you have had to ask. And again, if you want to put those in the chat, we'll be happy to add those to the slides. All right, so there's lots and lots of resources. So I tried to break them up a little bit based off of where they are and what they do. So this first set of resources is just sending you to the airlines pages on their accessible travel assistance and what they provide. Amtrak as well as Greyhound. And then also this last one was the Access Travel Center. I found that one when I was looking into that ride sharing options or taxi options. And it will break it down by state and really give you some rabbit holes to dig into. This next set is for reservations, activities, and organizations. So the National Ability Center is a great resource to look at different types of activities and things that people can do. And I believe they're based out of Utah. And they have these great events where people can do just about anything with disabilities, and they will set up these experiences for them. Recreation.gov. This will take you to like the list of all their national parks and campgrounds. They've added a feature where you can search specifically, filtering out which campgrounds are accessible. So I wanted to make sure to include that. And then a couple of these, Hank had mentioned Accessible Go and Project Airtime. Accessible Journeys, Travel Solutions, and the Society for Accessible Travel and Hospitality. Again, having information as well as some potential places for you to make those reservations. And then, of course, we put the Hank Poore Foundation in there as well. Last one that we have are blogs and travel guides. So Hank had mentioned Curb Free with Corey Lee, so we put that in there. Also, I put in some other ones. Friendly Like Me is crowdsourced reviews. So people will essentially give a review and base their own experience off of different locations and any issues they ran into or any perks that they found. There was some really neat articles from Condé Nast. Enabling Devices did one about best vacation spots. And then I really liked the Florida Panhandle blog that they had on the comprehensive traveling guide. Again, just good questions to think about, places to dig in for more information. All right, so we are definitely at the end of our session. So we're going to sit here for just a minute, make sure if anybody has any questions. And Hank, if you have any final thoughts that that you wanted to mention or that I forgot to mention as we wrap up. And while you get your thoughts together on that, I've just put in the link to our feedback survey. This is more for us to know that this is useful information for you and what we can do to help you in future trainings. So if you want to go to that SurveyMonkey link, I went ahead and I put it in the chat as well.
I think you covered it all. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. We've got a few minutes if you have questions, if you want to jump on the mic. And while we wait for that, I will just let you know where you can contact us for more information. So this last slide is our email. You can find us at APT at rehab.alabama.gov. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Just search for Accessing Potential Through Assistive Technology. And then we've provided you several different links. The first one takes you to our short-term loans that we have available for people and demos, our reuse centers. And then also, if you want more information about the National AT Act program and the Technical Assistance and Training Center, and then also the Alabama Department of Rehab Services. So I think that's it. So thank you, Hank, and thank you everyone for being here, and safe and happy travels.